Hello. 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 Hi. Welcome to another random encounter with my series on tabletop campaign ideas known as Tabletop Thoughts. This week, I am offering not advice on the urban campaign environment. Which, I should point out, is a campaign environment I absolutely love even if I don't always rely on it. For all the weaknesses and challenges associated with running a tabletop campaign set in a city, there are strengths and advantages that I think make up for them. And help me, as the GM, build certain styles of campaigns and enable certain ideas to come to the forefront. So, for this week, I'm going to start with what I feel are the obvious strengths of setting a campaign in a city. And one key advantage here is that it can be a ready-made base of operations for your group of adventurers, gang of enforcers of the border between the mystical and the mortal, ring of renegade demon spies, or parliament of owl demons. Consider, for a moment, what a typical party of player characters needs over the course of a campaign. A place to stay. Reliable sources of information. Allies they can trust. A shop that sells the mundane or peculiar supplies that they might need. Experts in esoteric fields in case they find anything eldritch and can't identify on their own. People they can talk to during downtime to relax. All manner of mundane goods and services to spend their gains, ill-gotten or otherwise, on. All of these things and more can be found in a city. Yes, you can set up a smaller settlement like a town or village to serve this role, but you likely might have trouble justifying a variety of individuals or organizations that fill these niches in a frontier town. A city will not only have all of the above, but will likely have multiple of each. Ronan the Skull Speaker over on Carver's Row is going to know a different kind of arcane lore from Madame Celia Ashcrown, Dean of the College of Temporal Mastery over at the University of the Unfathomable Arts. Mr. Mason's small mom-and-pop second-hand bookstore is going to have a different stock from Dr. Davenport's antique tome auction house. These differences can take your players to different parts of the city, interacting with different people, and stumbling on different challenges. It also gives them options on where to look or who to talk to if one approach fails due to bad rolls and gives you multiple ways to keep the momentum going and avoid stalling. Cities also enable characters to develop a sense of familiarity over time. They might develop a fondness for a specific tea shop or really like walking through that one little park. They might be a regular customer at this out-of-the-way little store of curios and curiosities or have a back alley doctor they trust to handle life and death situations without getting into trouble with the law. This familiarity makes it feel more lived in and alive to players because they're more invested in a world around them. Granted, this does require that you do a bit more work as you go along, but you can load at least some of that on the players. And all that effort is worth it in the end. A city, especially one that's vibrant and alive, is going to have access to more resources than a frontier town. Need a rare magical ingredient for a ritual to summon an elder god into the world? Good luck finding that in a frontier town, but you can probably find a dealer in such substances somewhere in a city. Academic or scientific expertise. Head to the local university. Need to convince someone to grease the political wheels as part of your plan to oust Lord Maximilian from his stewardship of the Alabaster Throne and claim the mantle of Lord High Executioner of the Cid Court? Well, you likely won't find anyone with that kind of influence outside of a major city. Unless your city is dying or already dead, you can likely justify just about any resource being available in it. It doesn't have to be easy to acquire, but it can be found. Or stolen. There's also the simple fact that cities are full of opportunities. As mentioned in a classic video game, cities always teem with evil and decay. Let's give it a good shake and see what falls out. There are any number of organizations, conspiracies, agendas, rivals, and whatnot you can find in a typical city. It doesn't stretch the imagination much to have some seemingly minor or unconnected thing become a gateway that leads your players down a path that gets them involved in the plots and schemes of some power player or organization in the city. However, the city environment as your main campaign environment can be challenging. To be specific, there is the risk of the GM feeling overwhelmed with the number of details they will need to keep in mind. Because the campaign focused on the city, even if you do only broad strokes at the start, details will pile up as you go along. Shops, people, street names, and more will all become part of the environment, part of the things that you as GM will need to remember. It can be overwhelming for beginners, in my experience. However, as long as you take copious notes and are willing to cross-reference them as you go along, then I think that should be fine. I remember doing this for multiple campaigns, and the ability to look back at the details I mentioned before was a great help in giving the place a sense of continuity, a feeling that the player characters were living in it instead of the city being nothing more than set dressing. The other major caveat I've found when running a campaign set in a city is the law. If a city has people enforcing the law, they have a tendency to become involved in the activities of player characters. Especially if the player characters tend to be destructive, chaotic, or just generally draw the wrong kind of attention. For some groups, I've found that this can be immersive and makes them consider their actions more than they would otherwise. For others, it ends up being a chore that they find stifling and adds unnecessary challenges to the game. Personally, I rather like this element, but I understand that it does tend to be difficult to use and it isn't for everyone. One element about urban campaigns I love but do find a bit challenging is how you can highlight some of the elements of the campaign just by selecting the city you play in. If I have a campaign about demonic schemes and the power of faith, I might be tempted to set it in Rome or Mecca. If the game is about the political maneuvering of great empires and complex webs of intrigue and betrayal in a fantasy setting, I'd model a city after Berlin during the Cold War. Now, there is no rule saying that every spiritual or religious campaign has to be set in Rome or that all spy campaigns use Casablanca or Berlin. But these cities provide an easy shorthand to evoke the right feel and mood, taking at least some of the weight off my shoulders as GM early on. Now that I've covered the good and the bad, let me delve into a neutral topic that often will come up in an urban campaign. And that is access to individuals of authority or influence. If you set a campaign in Renaissance Rome, players might reasonably expect to encounter or even speak to a cardinal or even the Pope. If your campaign involves the intrigues between the criminal organizations that run the underworld of Vienna in the year 2300, it is not that far-fetched for players to consider plans that involve meeting with or targeting the heads of these organizations. But you might reasonably assume that, being important figures, why would low-ranked and unknown individuals like the party be given access to these people? The approach to take with this has varied for me, from campaign to campaign. Once, in a game set in Ming-era China, I strictly enforced the security that protected the emperor and the Forbidden Palace, so it was almost impossible to get inside without being invited in. It became a challenge for that crew of martial arts heroes to do a great enough service to the emperor to get that invitation. In a Renaissance Rome campaign, I simply had it that the Pope was more accessible than usual and felt it was his responsibility to walk among the people and understand their needs. He considered it part of his duties as the secular and spiritual leader of Rome. In general, I think the best approach to take is to give the important figures varying degrees of accessibility. Some of them will be more open and easy to reach, perhaps trusting in either being loved or feared by the people to keep them safe. Others are hidden lords, operating from the shadows and relying on agents, proxies, and misdirection. There might be those who are willing to meet with outsiders if the circumstances warrant it or like going around in disguise to see how things really are. By providing various leaders with varying levels of accessibility, I found that it adds a bit of believability to a setting. It can also help nudge them in certain directions based on that ease of access, which is useful in subtly influencing where they go. It can also be a shock and motivation if that ease of access is suddenly taken away and they're not given a good reason for it. And those are all my thoughts for now on running a tabletop campaign set in a city. If you enjoyed or found this useful, please leave a like, subscribe, maybe leave a comment for the algorithm. Or you can support the channel and fund the Wi-Fi in my habitat by checking out my novels. Links in the description. See you next week, birds, humans, and lizards.